The quest for the 2026 national title begins today. Oh, and there's also supposed to be a hoops game, but not a hoops game. Ew, one sec.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Thank you for kicking off the 2025-26 football season with JT Wistersill and Parker Ainsworth in this crossover edition of Locked On Utes and Locked On Coogs. JT, I typically start with a random question and something odd. It's really about food. I got to ask, did you have any national championship game snacks during the party last night while you were watching this game?
I did. I'm not culinary talented at all, so I just threw some wings in the oven, Doritos, Lay's, and I threw a little fruit. I did some grapes too. So
it's healthy. It's like it's a salad that way. That's the way that goes.
What do you roll with?
We had some stuff over the weekend. It was a long weekend, frozen pizza kind of stuff. And honestly, I had a lot of leftovers tonight. Leftover frozen pizza is what you got to go with sometimes. JT, with the national championship game behind us last night, it is the start of the 2025-26 football season. And there is a big basketball game on the horizon. I don't mean to look past that between these two programs. But today starts a big day, theoretically, for a couple of bounce-back programs. And I want to ask you how Utah is looking, but I want to frame it like this. A year ago, Arizona State was going to be terrible. They were going to be awful. They're going to be the bottom of the new Big 12. At the time, they weren't even in the Big 12. And then they move into the conference. They're projected to come in dead last, and they win the whole thing. They go to the college football playoff and come within a pass interference penalty away from knocking off Texas and yada, 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 right? The story's been told that Houston and Utah both kind of finished near the bottom this year. I would imagine are not projected to do particularly well next year. We'll get into some FanDuel odds in a second. Tell me why Utah does the same thing.
Well, first of all, what you said is absolutely true. And I know it's a long off season until we get to the season, but if you listen to any Locked On channel, especially of a rebuilding team, we're going to talk about what ASU did constantly, because what ASU did is the hope that we are all going to be trying to reach in 2025. And I feel better about Utah right now, just as I'm sure you do with Houston, than I did about Arizona State at this point last year. I think for Utah's bounce back season, it's pretty simple. Yes, they lost two major players on the defensive side of the ball to the transfer portal, one of which went to BYU. So that really hurt, obviously. But if you're Utah, your biggest issue last year was bad quarterback play. That's the biggest reason you lost 7 of your last 8 games. And even with bad quarterback play, in all 7 of those losses, it was a game in the fourth quarter, and almost all of them outside the Colorado one, even ended at pretty much a 1-score game too. So it's okay, if you can fix your quarterback spot, theoretically you can bounce back. Well, you added the only player in college football who rushed for 2,000 yards and rushed for, I think, 1,000 yards and threw for over 2,500 yards. That's Devin Dampier. Came from New Mexico, 4th best offense in college football last year. Offensive coordinator comes with him too. You also get Weigman Parker, who's one of the top running backs in the transfer portal from Washington State. So you've upgraded on the offensive side of the ball. You get a lot of pieces back who are still good for you defensively. Lose some key players too, but it's a Utah defense usually pretty consistently good. So I think there's a lot of reason for optimism if you're a Utah of why you can at least be a contender in the Big 12 next year. How do you feel about Houston bouncing back?
I feel like I want to make jokes about being contending in the Big 12 and wanting to be in the Big 12 in the first place. I want to make those jokes, but I'm not going to. That's as far as I'm going to go. Fair. I feel pretty good about Houston next year for a lot of reasons.
Pretty good in what regard? I'm curious too.
I think really you're looking. I mean, you went from hoping for 6 wins to kind of the 6-win feels like a floor right now with Connor Weigman being the big transfer quarterback. Okay. I think this kind of thing where you got a couple years of Weigman and you're really thinking if you get a 7-8 win season, can you push for more the year after? And I don't think it's crazy. I mean, the schedule breaks out where you got a little bit easier opponents next year as well. Some transfers come in that can really shape out. I mean, they got 6 offensive linemen. They got some skill guys that put up big numbers at G5 schools, so you're hoping can translate. And again, Weigman at quarterback, he was a 5-star in high school, who's been hurt a couple times. You think if he's got a healthy season, things could shape out. The defense returns a lot. They were a good defense last year, as Utah saw. I really feel like there's a lot of reason to be optimistic going into the fall. I will say we were checking out FanDuel odds before the show, And I don't think FanDuel is quite as optimistic as you and I are,
I
JT.
don't think so either. Well, it goes all the way to the national championship game, which the fact that they even have national championship game odds for us is optimistic.
Well, I've got Connor Weigman right now at plus 18,000 on FanDuel to win the Heisman. And if someone wants to throw $100 our way, let's do it. Why not? What's the worst thing that happens?
What's tough too is like for someone like Weigman, like winning the Heisman's tough. Like getting to New York, that to me is a lot more feasible. I wish there was a way, like, I don't know if FanDuel allows us to do that. I don't think they do, but like if there was a way you could bet on him being top 5 in Heisman voting, like that to me is much more realistic than, winning is going to be incredibly hard. If you just look at the odds and what it would take and how unlikely it would be coming just from Houston, who's improving, but just still obviously gone through a lot as a football program. But I could see a world where he's in New York. I think that'd be cool if that was available.
Well, and to your point, we saw last year, like Janty at Boise State. You could have a great season, and someone else just also has a great season. Like that could just kind of be luck of. I mean, Cam Ward's season at Miami. He's a Houston local kid. We all wish he had come here, right? But he had a great season in Miami and didn't even get to go to New York, right? Like that's just the way that shapes out sometimes.
Crazy.
You
should have been there over Dylan Gabriel. I know Dylan Gabriel was on the best team, but I think he should have been.
When they have taken 5 in other years. You mentioned national championship odds. I've looked at Houston, and Houston's at plus 30,000. I weirdly feel like Utah is going to be better than that, though. What's Utah's odds right now on FanDuel?
Yeah, a little better, plus 14,000. So a little better, but yeah, it would be. You still think, even though TCU made a run to the national championship game, right? Like to still get over that hump, to beat the Georgias, the Ohio States, the Alabamas, like, and Alabama's down a little bit, but like it still just takes so much to beat a team at that level. I can't see Utah making the run all the way there.
I do think, though, again, following the Arizona State model, it shows that if you win your conference, you're in the dance, and then it's a bunch of 1 games, right?
Yeah.
Like it really can come. I mean, last night we saw Notre Dame almost win. I mean, they cut it to 8. I don't know what your opinion of the controversial field goal, should have gone for it, not whatever at the end there was.
I think they absolutely should have gone for it, but at the end of the day, like it didn't work out.
Right, and I actually was very much team should have gone for it as well. I didn't get the field goal. Spencer McLaughlin, I went back and forth a little bit on social media about it, and he's on the other camp. So I'm sure after this you should go listen to that and hear that out. But I really kind of feel vindicated that there were a bunch of close games. Close games are 1-game samples. If you win your conference, Arizona State was did Matthew Golden catch it, not catch it, right? Mm-hmm. Then Texas is in a relatively competitive one. I think that there's a bunch of steps there where it doesn't go so far away. I'd also point out, though, I know you're new to the conference, but once upon a time, Will Howard was a Big 12 quarterback. This is not outside of the realm of a Big 12 team.
That TCU team that made it to the national title beat them in the Big 12 championship game. I remember that very vividly.
So you had Will Howard, and then the Texas team that they beat along the way, right, was a recently Big 12 team. There's a connection there. There's connections across the board here. Mm-hmm. So if it's not Houston, it's not Utah. I'm going to put a gun to your head here, figuratively speaking. This is Texas. I should probably clarify that's figurative. Who wins Big 12? It's not us.
Who wins the Big 12? It's not us. I think right now I'll go Iowa State. I think right now I'll say Iowa State. I look at them as a bounce back candidate. Anytime a team goes through what they've been through, could they spiral the opposite way? Could they be the Atlanta Falcons that the next year, I think they missed the playoffs after the 28-3 just collapse. And obviously Iowa State didn't collapse, but they got the doors blown off. I think right now Iowa State would be my favorite. Arizona State just loses a lot. Camp Scadboo was so much to that team. I think BYU will be a threat. They'll be right back up there too. Kansas State's always going to be a staple in this conference. I'm sure I'm missing a couple others too.
So I was going to go Kansas State, and the funny thing is they play week 0, and again, back to FanDuel.
Crazy.
Back to FanDuel. They play week 0, and the odds, they've got Kansas State favored by 1.5. That's a game that I think Kansas State's technically the home team in, but is not being played in the United States, if I'm not mistaken. Is that
one of those games?
So if that's your cup of tea, if you feel like betting on a foreign crowd, FanDuel.com is a place to go.
Really quick, Parker, I just want to say what you made the point about how close ASU was to beating Texas. That's every fan base should feel some level of optimism watching what ASU did. Utah nearly beat ASU, and that was very much a game, even with the bad quarterback situation. So if you're Utah, if you're Houston, if you're all these teams, just hey, All we have to do is just win a couple, coaches love to say go 1-0 each week. That's a very popular phrase coaches use. If you can just go 1-0 in a bunch of weeks in a row, you can find yourself in a one-game situation, as you mentioned, Parker, and then anything is possible. And that should get every college football fan very excited, because as much as the SEC wants to paint there's no parity and all these things going on, we saw with our own eyes how close the gaps can be between some of these teams.
And they saw with their own eyes from the same couches that we all saw at the national championship game that they
Lincoln.
were not in. Before we get too far, we got a basketball game to talk about and that kind of stuff as well. Game's been postponed, so we got a little bit more fluidity in time here, but we can't get too far without talking about our buddies over at Prize Picks, the place to get real money on sports action. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings, Prize Picks has changed the game in daily fantasy sports. Whether it's the playoffs or the regular season, Prize Picks has made it easier than ever to win big while enjoying all the football action. And now it's playoff time. NFL playoff time, that is. And there's no better place to get in on the action than with Prize Picks. Here's how it works. You simply pick more or less on at least two players. And if your picks hit, you win up to 1,000 times your cash. That's right, 1,000 times your money just by making a few simple picks. And what I learned last weekend, JT, is that you don't pick less than or lower or low or less or anything on the low side with Travis Kelce or Patrick Mahomes. Get ready to run your game this football season. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege. Get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's $50 just for playing. Don't wait. Take your game to the next level with Prize Picks. Prize Picks, run your game. Now, I will mention that both Kelce kind of and then Mahomes definitely are both Big 12 alumni, technically, right? I mean, Cincinnati's in the conference now, right?
There
you go.
Right.
There you go. That's the transition. Kelce likes basketball.
Wait, really quick, just on the point of like parity and like what you can do. Like the championship matchup in the AFC features a Texas Tech quarterback and a quarterback from Wyoming. You can find talent anywhere, and that's what teams are doing in the transfer portal right now too.
I would also point out that you have that happening, but Jalen Hurts went to Oklahoma when they were a Big 12 school, right? More Big 12 connections there. And then Jaden Daniels went to Arizona State, which is now a Big 12 school, right? Yep. That's all the connections.
Yeah, they're more
all the time. We're going to be coming on this to talk about a Tuesday night basketball game that has been moved to Wednesday night. So if you're listening to this and you have not heard yet, the Tuesday night matchup between Houston and Utah at the Fertitta Center has been moved to Wednesday night at 5 o'clock local Central Time for ice and rain delays and stuff like that. I bet it's a fairly empty gym. It's pretty gnarly in Southeast Texas right now. Just the whole state's like below 30, and then they've got a whole bunch of rain precipitation come through. So if you can safely get to the game, we hope you enjoy. If not, the rest will be watching us on ESPN Plus Wednesday night. But JT, you guys, first of all, are much more used to snow, but also had a pretty big weekend in hoops. BYU, I thought was really good this year.
I think BYU thought they were going to be really good this year too, if you asked them coming in.
Well, you sound like someone who has. So tell us about how that one went, because you got to play a few extra minutes in that one.
We did. I mean, an overtime thriller. And look, Cougars, I also thought they would be better than they are. But the Kevin Young hire was such a big get. I feel like there were things that were kind of being said about BYU before like the era even began. And now they're playing some games. And also I think what BYU fans forgot is it takes a coach time to build his program, to get his guys in there he wants. And yes, Mark Pope had done a good job when he was there. I've liked him, and I think he's doing a pretty good job at Kentucky right now too overall. But it's hard. It takes time. And I think you see that with a BYU team that they entered the Utah game like coming in. They'd lost a couple in a row. They were not trending in the right direction. This is a Utah team that they had been struggling before their win against Oklahoma State. And I know Oklahoma State's not very good, but that was Utah's first win against a Power Four. Obviously, we include the Big East and some of the other ones too. So like more than that, but just like a legit basketball team. That was their first win against one. Well, then they turned that into a win against TCU. Okay, also a nice win. Well, what are you going to do against your rival at home? A big game. Craig Smith has been at Utah now. This is his fourth year. There's some conversations about, is he going to come back for another? That's a big game. You got to win. And Utah was able to gut it out and win a really ugly contest. This team is playing some of their best ball right now, finding ways to win. Ezra Ausar is becoming a star a little bit. I mean, you go 26 points in a rivalry game like that, with almost all of those coming in the second half. This Utah team's got some shooters too. Now, Gabe Madsen was 1 for 11 from 3, but when he's hitting them, he can be pretty effective too. So look, Houston's the better team in this matchup, but ESPN's got us at a 5% chance to win. Can I at least get a 10%? I mean, come
So
on.
you mentioned something though, because I want to ask about this Madsen kid because he
Which one?
does shoot
Sure.
a lot of threes, and he missed a lot of them over the weekend. And my worry is really that like the regression to the mean kind of math. I mean, he's going to hit a lot of threes on Wednesday. Who is this kid? Why is he shooting 10 threes a game?
He's actually a former Big 12 alum because before even Utah, because he was at Cincinnati before he transferred to Utah 3 years ago. His brother Mason is also on the team. So you have Gabe and Mason Madsen. Both of them like to fill it up. Gabe is the better player. And yes, it's been a little bit of a struggle as of late for Gabe Madsen. People know he's the best player on this team. So they've started to try and key in on him. And I mean, you look, he has not made over 3 threes in a game since. I mean, yes, he was 4 for 14 against Iowa State, but the last time he was efficient from 3, honestly, probably be that St. Mary's game on December 7th. Teams know that Utah wants to get him the ball, so his degree of difficulty is incredibly high on those shots. But because they'll do so much and be so aggressive trying to take Gabe away, that's going to open things up for a guy like an Ezra Ausar. This team also was so transfer heavy. I think it took them time to craft their identity. So now you don't just have a guy like Madsen. You're seeing the Ausars. Keanu Dawes is stepping up. You're getting a couple other guys. Mongolian Mike is another one for Utah where he's starting to do a little bit more too. Muro Litter, the Baylor transfer. There's a lot of new pieces starting to come together. Heck, Caleb Lohner was playing football at Utah, the former Baylor basketball player. He was playing football at first, and now he's his team's like backup center. Like, that's how crazy this makeshift Utah team has been. And you couldn't ask them to be playing much better basketball than they are right now, heading into this game against an incredibly tough Houston team.
A former football player being a backup big man is actually kind of close to my heart. I love that a lot. And I want to talk about Dawes, and I want to talk about Ausar because I think Ausar, like you mentioned, if you look at his box scores, kind of come on late. But the other Madsen has actually shot a much better percentage from 3. Yep. Is that kind of just because he's getting less looks, or is he the more efficient one, but Gabe gets all the shots? What's the catch there?
Yeah, Gabe will take them at a much higher degree of difficulty versus Mason is going to be more your catch and shoot guy. And I mean, even you look at the BYU game, right? He only ended up playing him for 5 minutes. Now he normally gets a little more than that, but Gabe is the guy that Utah wants to get going. They want to let him fill it up from 3. Gabe has the green light. Mason has a green light, but it is not as green as Gabe Madsen. So Gabe is the guy who's going to be out there. Defense is keeping track of him at all times. So definitely a difference in how those two are utilized.
Keanu Dawes, you mentioned, has kind of come on as of late as well. He's a Houston area kid. Went to Stratford High School. He went to Rice last year. Now, obviously, we want Houston to win here as a Cougar fan, but if he were to get 20 points, I don't think it would. And Houston won. I don't think people would be upset. I think it's kind of a best of both worlds thing. What have you liked about Keanu Dawes? How's he been? What's the transition for him been like from Rice, an American Athletic Conference school, to Big 12 basketball in Utah?
Yeah, he was a guy who started out the year struggling a little bit, kind of had to figure out or I guess was okay at the start of the year, but really had to kind of figure out a role for this team. And I like him a lot off the bench, being the athletic forward that he is. I think he's done a good job kind of decreasing his volume in threes. He had a game earlier in the season where he was over 3 of 3, and you're kind of like, that's not really your game. Now, if he's at 1 or 2 a game, I like that. And you look at his shot chart recently, like that's kind of what he's taken. 1 a game, and then outside of that, he can be a guy who goes to work inside a little bit, obviously an athletic body to throw at you defensively too. So I think Keanu Dawes has done a good job for Utah. I think he's been a valuable piece. You need guys like Keanu Dawes, right? Athletic forwards, guard multiple positions. Yes, would I love it if he was an great outside shooter? Of course. But if he was a great outside shooter with his frame, he would not be at Utah. So you see him at Utah. He's able to come off the bench and contribute a little bit there. I think he's kind of found into a nice niche right now. But this is becoming, yes, Gabe Madsen is the best shooter on this team, and college basketball is very 3-point heavy. Utah also likes to shoot a lot of threes. This is becoming Ezra Ausar's team. With the performance he had against the rival BYU, you got to continue to go to him more, and I do think Utah is going to try to do that against Houston.
Well, and he had 20 points as well. He broke 20 a couple days earlier against Oklahoma State. And so I guess my question is kind of twofold. One, what has he done to take over the team? And then 2, why didn't he have it at the start? Like, why did it take so long?
Yeah, I think it goes back because you're right. I mean, obviously it would have been great if he was thriving earlier on, but he's another guy who's an East Carolina transfer. He was there for a couple of years with the Pirates. So it took him that time to kind of come over and adjust. But now that he has, it's starting to kind of bear the fruits of the benefits if you're Utah too. It feels like this whole team So many new pieces. I mean, from last year's starting lineup, you have Gabe Madsen back, and at times Lawson Lovering, their center, who is a big body down low. He can do some things. I don't know if it's it's not a mismatch against Houston, but he can produce a little bit. So maybe he'll be able to contribute there. But like really only two guys back. Utah lost a lot. I mean, their point guard went to play for Rick Pitino, where I just for some reason blanked where he's at Iona, I think it is. So or he was, So some of those things. But you lose a lot. So it took this team time to come together. I think they took the coaches time as well. Ausar was always one of the bigger transfers they got, averaging 13 a game at ECU. So it really felt like it just took him time to get settled in. And now that he has, you're seeing, and that was obviously, I mean, for him to have a career high, it was a career high 26 for him. And he had a career high just in the second half alone. I think he had 24 points in the second half. Like that's how effective he was. So he's starting to turn the corner a little bit too. Utah's got to continue to give him opportunities down low inside. His athleticism, his explosiveness is something they have to utilize. His strength too, good quickness down there. You got to continue to go to Ausar if you're Utah. I think he's the best overall scoring option this team has, other than when Gabe Madsen's going to start going crazy from three. But if they have to double Ausar down low, if he starts to cook, or Lawson Lovering, Utah's other center, that can open up things for Madsen too, of course. So I hope to see Utah continue to utilize Ausar down low more and more frequently.
I want to talk about Houston and Utah meeting up last year, early in the year. It was technically a non-conference game.
Right.
And all that kind of stuff too, because I think that's why it was a close game. I think that's why I'm a little bit on edge about this one going into Wednesday. But before we get too far into that, today's show is also brought to you, as we mentioned several times, by our buddies over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And from the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300. You heard that correct. $300 back in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 in bonus bet to keep the action going. The FanDuel app is so easy to navigate. The variety of different bets, things like that can keep every game, or as we just mentioned, every season, exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no waiting around for your winnings. And whether you're betting on your favorite team, like the Coogs, the Utes, or whomever, or just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs, like, with the Texans being out of it, you might need to do, FanDuel has got you covered. Visit FanDuel.com, join today, get started with $300 back in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this season unforgettable with FanDuel, a trusted partner of the NFL. JT, Parker Andrew here, both Locked On Coogs and Locked On Utes, crossing over. Last year, these two teams played, and Houston, who would spend part of the season ranked #1 in the country and had a future NBA guy at point guard and returns a lot of last year's roster, honestly, struggled on this one, different points to cover the 3-point line, including, as I pulled the box score to make sure I had this number right, Gabe Madsen getting loose for 8 of 15 from behind the arc. This team is not last year's team. You've covered this program.
Only three guys back. Only 3 guys back from last year's team.
Only 3 guys back, which is comforting to me, except that one of them is Gabe Madsen. Lawson Loverling, also what's worth, had the 3rd most points on the team last year in that contest. Are you going to tell me that Brandon Carlson is that important? Like what's the thought there?
Yeah, well, Brandon Carlson was one of the best. I mean, over the last 5 years, was overall this team's best player during that span. Was a part of a lot of games and memories, and got an extra 5th year because of COVID. That was actually contributed in one of the Thunder's recent wins against like the Cavs, I think it was too. So fun to see him do things in the NBA. But yeah, they miss him. But they have added other guys, having like Lawson back another year in the system, I think has helped. And you get a little more. The one thing that always hurt with Carlson was he wasn't much of a stretch shooter. He would do it at times. Like that wasn't his specialty. And you get even more athletic, even though he was an athletic 5. Like they would try and play him and Lawson together. So you're asking a lot of Brandon Carlson. So new team, they shoot even more threes, as we kind of mentioned earlier. But this is, last year you catch Houston by surprise. If Utah had lost all their games leading into this, like that would be different. I mean, they lost 4 in a row before this recent 3-game winning streak. So they're obviously not going to be catching the Cougars by surprise. And it's going to be tough. I mean, you just look at the difference in like Utah allows 70 points per game. Houston only allows 55. That's where that number makes me nervous. But there's hope for Utah. I mean, Utah does move the ball a little better than Houston, 19 assists compared to 13. So that gives me some optimism there. Yes, you've won 10 games in a row. So obviously another big differential by that standpoint. But if you're Utah, you couldn't ask to be playing much better basketball right now, and at least some positive momentum going into what right now is, I think it is their toughest game. Well, I guess they played Iowa State too, but like one of your easily top 3 toughest games on the season. I'm glad it's coming when you're on a winning streak, instead of me coming on here having to convince myself, well, like, hey, Utah's lost 8 in a row, so at least they won't catch, like, they won't see us coming. Like, that's not what I have to tell myself.
Well, talk to me. What kind of question? You mentioned Craig Smith's been there 4 years. There's questions about how much longer he'll be there potentially, and expectations and all that kind of jazz. What kind of questions has Craig Smith got right now? I mean, he's got a pretty big task. He got an extra day to get ready, I guess, kind of, right? I mean, what's going through his head right now?
I think Craig Smith's thing, it's not about you want to be competitive against Houston. I don't think if they lose to Houston, that doesn't, you're supposed to lose to Houston, right? Like Utah basketball, no matter who the coach is supposed to lose to Houston. I think what you would love to have happen, though, is Utah makes this a game like they did last year. And that early in the season, when you do something like that, you're building optimism. It was a disappointment for Utah to miss the tournament last year. They started the year and looked like they would end up in the NCAA tournament, but they did not. And that's your goal if you're Utah, is I think you just want to build optimism. I think Craig Smith's whole goal this year is to prove he's the right guy to lead this program going forward. I think what's really challenging about that is I don't see this team making an NCAA tournament. So how do you just get close like you did last year? And even though you missed it, it was like, well, last year's team on paper was even more talented. So maybe it shows like, hey, this is an even more impressive coaching job. It's going to be tough because everyone wants to make the NCAA tournament, but you're probably not going to do that this year with the contract coming up. I think he's in an incredibly tough spot. I actually think he's a really good coach. Is he the greatest recruiter? Maybe that's not the case, but it's also hard to recruit because it's more so what you do in the transfer portal. Have all the transfer portal additions always hit? No, they haven't. I think he's a very good in-game coach, but obviously all the additions haven't paid off. What can Utah basketball realistically do as a program? I think your goal is like every couple years to make the tournament. They haven't made the tournament since 2017. Larry Krzyzewski didn't do it. Craig Smith didn't do it. So like, this is not they didn't. You could, unfortunately, I wish that I was wrong, Parker, but it's been
that was surprising to me. I think of like the Kyle Kuzma kind of times and all that kind of stuff.
That's the last team that did it. It's Kyle Kuzma. A long time ago.
I wouldn't have thought it'd been that long ago. And truthfully, I guess I feel like there's hype around the BYU thing, and obviously they're like very different places. But I feel like if you can get people to Provo, you should be able to get people to Salt Lake. There's a different appeal to BYU, though. I guess it's a different place, but
yeah, BYU basketball has been better as of recently. Utah's actually beat them a lot. That's what's kind of funny. Like Utah has several upsets against them, but they are usually upsets. Like BYU usually comes into the game favored, and Utah obviously had success. BYU had success in the WAC before for basketball, but now in the Big 12, your hope is if you're Utah, you can try and pass them up. I just think for whatever reason, I'm trying to, like, for BYU, they have a better basketball game day atmosphere. There's no doubt about that. And that's where Utah's become a football school. And when you become, BYU is they're more well-rounded than that at football and basketball, I'd say, but Utah is more a football school, and the basketball just hasn't been there as much. So the state of Utah basketball-wise has produced some good players. Most of those guys are at BYU right now. So that's where you're also at a little bit of a disadvantage. And once again, Utah fans listening don't only like, oh, the Utah school basketball talent is good. There are good players in the state, but there are not a lot we see leaving to go to D1 schools. And the best of the best, like there's a guy, Brody Kozlowski, he's at USC right now. So the best of the best, you can't even, those guys end up going off. They did get one recent player, but I think those things have hurt Utah. You're not the team in your state.
And they have the Wasatch Academy program. It's like a high school academy type deal, but those kids are not always from Utah.
They go to BYU. That's Caleb Lohner. Before he made his way to Utah, he started his career at BYU.
And Houston's got a great 2025 commit in Isaiah Harwell, who's at Wasatch Academy, right? But what I was going to say is they get kids.
Thank you guys for stealing another one. Thank you.
Well, if they're not from Utah, though, they're not going to have the same connection. The same way like every Montverde kid doesn't go to Florida, right? Like that's not how that goes.
I want a better basketball team.
It's a fun thing. I understand that, you thought the football program had a good couple of years, right? I get all that. That's me rubbing it in. I'm too nice. That's me rubbing it in.
Not used to being a Big 12 bottom dweller like you guys were last year. New experience for me.
Hey, as you have seen, and as we opened with, as Arizona State showed all of us, it doesn't have to last long.
True. It's true. That's the hope. That's the hope.
That's our full circle moment. Now we've got an extra day to get ready for this game, so we're gonna be talking more about it on Locked On Cougs as well as whatever transfer portal stuff, and if we hear more on spring and practices, and if stuff gets frozen over or whatever's going on at the University of Houston between now and Wednesday. JT, what else you got on the docket this week? Because you got an extra day between the basketball game now here.
Yeah, do have an extra day between the game, but honestly, I'm feeling confident, Parker. I'm ready to make my prediction right now. And I believe that Utah is going to lose to Houston. I think they're going to put up a fight, though. I actually think they keep it within. I think they're doing some good things. Like, I think this game I think Houston will lead by 20 for a lot of it. And then Utah will make a late kind of run and they'll stay within 15. So I think we'll leave feeling semi-optimistic about Utah. But yeah, overall, I think Houston's the better team. For Locked On Utes this week, we're just going to be talking the latest with transfer portal news, rumors. We'll have players declaring for the draft, any kind of leftover ones. It's the last week to do it, I think, to gear up for the Senior Bowl. So always new things going on in college football and always a lot to learn about the Big 12 Conference, Parker, which me and most Utah fans are delighted to be in.
Yeah, not the vocal ones on the internet. As far as our prediction goes, I will say I think it's also going to be a weird game, and this is where we'll get out of it. Having a small home crowd that I'm anticipating with the weather, throwing it off a day, playing it a day later, and Utah making a rather large number of threes per game, it does kind of yield for a weird – I'm not going to predict an upset, but I think whatever you see the line as, and it's been taken down and not published because the game has been bumped a day, I would say it's probably closer than most people will be, but I'm still picking the Coogs. JC also picked the Coogs, so I don't feel so crazy there. You can find us both wherever you get your podcasts each and every day. Also have live reactions or next day reactions and all that kind of stuff and all that kind of fun stuff to dump in the comments as well. This has been and always will be a Locked On crossover edition between Locked On Cougs and Locked On Utes. Thanks for making us your first listen today. If you're a basketball person, Locked On College Basketball is a whole show dedicated to basketball all the time. Go check that one out for your second listen. Thanks again, and go Cougs, JT. Go Cougs.